Hello, I will be reading chapters from the book Out of the Shadows, Reimagining Gay Men's Lives by Walt Odets. Chapter 1. Are gay men homosexuals? What is a homosexual? There are two different perspectives on what makes a man a homosexual. The first, the heterosexual perspective, is that homosexuals are men who have sex with men. The gay man's perspective, briefly put, is that he is attracted to other men. The difference between the two descriptions is important. The heterosexual identifies a single objective behavior, the gay man an entirely internal life of feeling. While the straight man may feel support, indifference, fear, or contempt for the idea of the homosexual, the gay man has more complex feelings, in part because the term has historically been used to stigmatize. Are you a homosexual? Is easily, often correctly, experienced as the opening salvo of an attack. The majority of gay identified men do have at least a marginally conscious sense that being gay is about more than sexual attraction or sex. But many gay men have been swayed by the heterosexual definition and have accepted the narrow, behaviorally defined identity. In today's gay assimilationist politics, gay men often explain themselves to heterosexuals with the idea that they are attractive to men, but otherwise just like you. In that assertion, the gay man is accepting the heterosexual perspective on who he is. The gender of his sexual partner defines him as a gay, and is his only distinguishing difference. From a psychological perspective, this is simply not the whole truth, and the claim often does a serious disservice to gay lives. For gay men, sexual attraction to other men is only one expression of something more fundamental, something that might be called a gay sensibility. As I'm using the term, gay sensibility describes both the man's internal experience of himself and his characteristic external expression of self to others. Together, the two constitute a sensibility, and a gay sensibility is often different from that of heterosexual men. Sexual attraction is not the cause of gay sensibility, although it may influence and inform it. Nor is it the simple idea of the homosexual an adequate characterization of that sensibility. The question I am raising, whether or not the gay men are homosexuals and should be characterized as such, is not at all intended to dismiss the importance of gay sexual lives. Sexuality is of central importance in all human life, whether acknowledged or not. What it means to be gay has for too long been defined by others, and too much of that imposed definition has been incorporated into gay self-experience. Being gay offers important opportunities that can only be realized if gay people can free themselves of societal and internalized stigma, much of which stems from the conventional idea of the homosexual. Freed from this narrow characterization, gay people have lives that are, in some ways, like heterosexual lives, and, in other ways, appreciably different. Lives that express such complexity are often better, fuller, more authentic lives. Gay people, with a historical focus largely on men, have been designated homosexuals in the psychological literature since the late 19th century, when the previously little used term appeared in the German psychiatric text Psychopathia Sexualis. In addition to homosexuality, the author Richard von Krafft-Ebing cataloged other psychosexual phenomena including bestiality, exhibitionism, pedophilia, and sadism. The company homosexuals kept in this tone of perversions was a good indicator of where the understanding of gay lives was headed in the developing psychiatric literature, the popular mind, and too often the gay mind. But the significance of psychopathia sexualis went disturbingly beyond the classification of same-sex behavior as a pathological perversion. Before this treatise, homosexual sex had been only a behavior, a single anomaly in an otherwise normal human being. With psychopathia, homosexual behavior became something that could identify and characterize an entire person. Not only was the behavior pathological, The entire man was. The man with a discrete cancer had become a cancer. The newly assignated identity was readily incorporated into the self-experience of the gay men, giving rise to a self-perpetuating psychosocial dynamic of imposed social stigma and reactive, internalized shame that in turn bolstered the stigma. Gay men were being identified as homosexuals, and that is what they started to feel like. What the new psychosocial dynamic persistently ignored was the complex sensibility, the experience of self, others, and the world that lay behind and gave expression to the sexual behavior. The psychological lives of gay people would be lost to psychiatry, which embarked on a campaign to explore gay lives with the intent of revealing the psychopathology that was presumably the root of the problem. In his seminal history of the American homophile movement, John D'Amelio discusses the role that the 19th and 20th century medicalization of homosexuality played in the new homosexual identity. Ironically, the medical model promoted the articulation of a gay identity and made it easier for many lesbians and homosexuals to come out. In elaborating upon their theories, doctors helped create the phenomenon that most of them wished to eliminate. They transformed an evil impulse that the morally upright strove to resist into the primary constituent of one's nature, inescapable because it permeated one's being. Medical theories made homosexuality not a deed that one avoided, but a condition that described who one was." End quote. While the attention of psychiatry beneficially promoted the articulation of a gay identity, this narrow, stigmatized, and polarizing identity would prove to be immensely destructive. The earlier perception of the evil impulse left a person's identity as a human being otherwise relatively intact, but the new approach would shrink the entire identity into the evil impulse itself. As D'Amelio points out, psychiatry usefully, if inadvertently, accomplished an important affirmation of gay individuals. They had something in common with other people, gay people. Psychiatry thus brought being homosexual out of the one-man closet into a new group closet. This group closet was equipped with a newfangled light, the light of psychiatric diagnosis and insight, that turned on automatically whenever the closet door was open, and scrutinized and pathologized the very homosexual identity that psychiatry itself had created. Unavoidably, the new group closet did something else. It polarized the homosexual identity for gay people themselves. A person does not have the self-experience of being distinctive and an outsider until he encounters a group from which he is different and excluded. Being a member of the new group closet clearly excluded one from the most of society, a society that left no doubt about the differences. Gay communities were thus born, populated by deviants who, by definition, had one thing in common: socially disapproved sexual interests. Where homosexual behavior is not disapproved, it is much less likely to be experienced as an identity, and if it is, the identity is much broader. When I recently asked a gay Dutch public health official what it meant to be gay in the Netherlands, he responded, "I'm not sure what the question is. If you mean, do we live in our own parts of town as you do in the US, the answer is no. The whole issue doesn't mean as much in the Netherlands. We don't really have gay and straight people the way you do. It's more like we have people, and all people are different." Today, a majority of American gay men still very much live in that group closet defined by the homosexual identity. A gay friend recently told me that he had asked his mother why she never inquired about how he and his partner were getting on. "Why should I?" she responded. "I never ask your brother about what he and his wife are doing in bed." Well, we have become accustomed to the social construction of the homosexual. From a psychological perspective, it is peculiar that we would classify and characterize a group of people entirely by their sexual behavior. As essential as sexuality is in human life, sexual behavior does not constitute a complete relationship to another or a complete life, and sexual practices are not close to a complete description of anyone. The origins of this odd practice lie partly in the different social roles that gay men play. In particular, that they do not breed, and in the fact that sex is a concrete, observable behavior. The other part of gay men, the complex, rich internal sensibility, is not usually observable by others, and many gay men have become necessarily expert at limiting any external expressions of their internal lives, even to other gay men. Walking in San Francisco's Castro or New York's Chelsea, I am often struck by how many men on the street appear to be uncomfortable making eye contact or offering a passing hello. They look slightly furtive or inauthentically aloof. Some of this behavior is probably a product of the male adolescent's learned caution about revealing any interest in another boy and being discovered as gay. But the homosexual identity is characterized by sex, and the furtive or apparently aloof gay man is sometimes also avoiding any response that suggests acceptance of a fear or unwanted sexual invitation. Having found their first experience of sexual currency and their sexual desirability, too many men are left feeling that the only interest another man might have in them is sexual. Over the years, 1,000 gay men have said to me, "The only thing other men are interested in is sex. And that's not what I want. It's not enough." To this I usually respond, "But the other 999 gay men I have spoken with have said the same thing." I think that many others share your feelings. The Castro and Chelsea are too often not social communities, but neighborhoods of people wandering the streets, all looking for something they are convinced is unattainable because of who gay men are. The wanderers know only his own internal sensibility, not that of others who are homosexuals, pure and simple. The homosexual identity is not only problematic because it is narrowly defined by sex, it is made even worse when the sex is considered deviant. As D'Amelio points out, the term homosexual has always been used to express religious, social, or medical disapproval. Homosexual behavior has been a sin, a crime, or a sickness. Even as many gay men may be unconscious of such feelings about themselves, some have feelings, not usually ideas, that other gay men are sinful, criminal, or sick, none of which makes them desirably obtainable. One solution for such gay men is the not uncommon interest in straight acting, straight identified men, who are, for other reasons, also usually unobtainable. There is something else I have heard 1,000 times from gay men. "I'm never interested in men who are interested in me, and those I am interested in never return the feeling." What this particular, completely implausible predicament suggests is that the obstruction lies not in who other gay men actually are, but in what he, the seeker of relationships, feels about himself. The psychological mechanism is projection. When a man shows interest in another man, the interested man becomes a deviant homosexual in the eyes of his object. And this works bidirectionally. Both men feel some, probably unconscious, sense of their own homosexual undesirability and project that feeling onto each other. In such a mutually projective scheme, anyone who shows interest is disqualified. The story of Larry. Larry and I first met for therapy in 2014, and he clearly expressed the problematic nature of the homosexual identity and the role of stigmatization in codifying it. Larry was a 28-year-old African American who, by his own description, grew up in Ohio in a seriously Catholic family. At the age of 23, he moved to San Francisco, where he worked as an electrical engineer. Larry had come to me to talk about having relationships, in which he said he had been a complete failure. When Larry was 12, his mother had found him in sexual play with another boy, and the event became the family's preoccupation. After my mother discovered me, everything changed. It was then that I realized I didn't want to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a homosexual. I'm a homosexual instead of an astronaut? It's difficult to imagine them as conflicting options. Homosexuality became everything. It's all that my parents talked about. That's the word they used. And it was all I thought about when I thought about my future. I wasn't even black anymore, just gay. They told me 100 times that if I didn't change, I was going to hell. Not going to hell was all that mattered to me. I would think to myself, I am a homosexual, and everything seemed to start from there. So being an astronaut, well, that wasn't even on the table anymore. Being a homosexual seems like a very narrow way to think about yourself and your future. You did become an engineer. Was that okay? Perhaps the question is it okay to think of yourself that way, as primarily a homosexual? No, not really, because being a homosexual is a hopeless thing to be as far as I know. Because you know the things. Homosexuals don't have relationships, their families reject them, and they die lonely. And being black and gay is even worse, much worse. You belong nowhere. Do you still feel that hopelessness? Do you believe that gay people don't have relationships? And what about being black and gay? I know they have relationships. I don't know how good they are, but I know they do. But that's not what I feel. I do feel it's hopeless. And I don't belong with black people or gay people. I don't know if you understand that. For gay men, there's a lot of racism, and I'm pretty much a thing, which some guys are into and some are not. As far as my life has gone, being gay has been about having sex with guys who are into black men. I've never really had anything beyond that. At the age of 12, Larry had engaged in a single activity, physical play with his friend, and it had become his entire identity. Overnight, he had become a homosexual, and in elaborating on this label, the family strengthened that identity with polarizing rejection. Larry was the only one in the family who would end up in hell. Neither Larry nor his parents had been able to give any attention to the internal life, the person that motivated the natural physical exploration of two young adolescents. My 30-year working experience had made clear that gay men with the most oppositional and hostile families are likely to hold the strongest, deepest, and narrowest identities as gay men. As with Larry's experience, sexual behavior becomes, if not the entire sense of self, a too significant part of it. On his own, Larry would almost certainly not have created so narrow an identity. A perceptive and thoughtful man, he had successful interests in many areas. He was not only an engineer, but an accomplished furniture maker and a budding pilot. But in his deepest feelings, he remained a homosexual and felt hopeless about himself and the possibility of relationships. This fundamentally gregarious and empathetic man was emotionally isolated and lonely, which was the very life his parents warned him about. American society had successfully created another homosexual, a man who experienced himself as a sexual thing and not much else. A study from Indiana. The extent to which homosexuals still defines being gay in America is revealed not only in Larry's story, but in a useful study conducted by members of the Department of Sociology at Indiana University. The psychological insight offered by the study lies in the author's distinction between formal rights and informal privileges for couples. The formal rights polled in this study excluded gay marriage. The 2015 Supreme Court decision had not yet been handed down, but included other formal rights such as legal partnership, insurance benefits, and hospital visitations. Informal privileges included telling others of the nature of their relationship, as well as holding hands, kissing on the cheek, and French kissing in public. The last three items are known as public displays of affection, or PDA. The 1,073 subjects polled were approximately half heterosexual males and females, and half gay and lesbian identified people. Given the recent rise in public support for gay marriage, it is not surprising that the Indiana study concludes, overall, heterosexuals are as willing to grant formal rights to the same-sex couple as they are to the heterosexual couple. However, The responses from heterosexuals are very different on the matter of informal privileges, particularly public displays of affection. Beginning with heterosexual males' attitudes, we find clear evidence of sexual prejudice across all the informal privilege items. Heterosexual males are significantly less approving of informal privileges for both the lesbian couple and the gay couple than for the heterosexual couple, but they are significantly less approving of the gay couple than of the lesbian couple. The heterosexual females polled for the study were similarly less supportive of informal privileges, including displays of affection, though they were not significantly less approving of the gay couple compared to the lesbian couple, with the exception of kissing on the cheek. In addition to the 505 heterosexuals, the study polled approximately the same number of lesbian and gay men. The two same-sex groups were more willing to grant displays of affection to heterosexuals than to themselves, and the gay men were significantly less approving of gay men kissing on the cheek and French kissing than were the lesbians. In addition to the study data, the same authors have collected data on whether heterosexuals perceive gay and lesbian couples as being in love. The short answer, particularly for the gay male couples, is that they do not. Study respondents were asked to read exactly the same short story about a romantically involved couple, with only the names changed to indicate whether the couple was heterosexual, lesbian, or gay. In a brief online summary of the study, the lead author, Long Doan, notes, "The findings suggest that people seem to think of loving relationships in a hierarchy, with heterosexual couples being the most in love, followed by lesbian couples, and then gay couples. Additionally, how in love a participant understood that couple to be led them to decide how many informal or formal rights they may deserve as a couple, from holding hands in public to having the right to marry." The study authors provide insightful discussion of the meanings of both studies, but in the following paragraphs I draw on my own, more psychologically focused interpretations. Data on the display of affection, marriage, and love suggests that heterosexuals do not readily perceive gay men as having emotional lives or relationships similar to their own. Kissing on the cheek or being in love implies an internal sensibility that flies in the face of the behaviorally based homosexual identity. Gay men are homosexuals, and empathy for them is thus low. As the authors stated, first and foremost, we find that gay couples are at a disadvantage regarding love. They are deemed as less loving than both heterosexuals and lesbian couples. Gay relationships, but not lesbian relationships, are seen as more physical and sexual in nature than heterosexual relationships. Steeped in the idea of the homosexual, heterosexuals do not perceive gay male relationships as emotionally significant, real relationships. Even gay men's sexual relationships are not quite real. They are physical acts that lack the emotional, human significance that heterosexuals claim for their own sexual lives. Such ideas and feelings have been internalized by too many gay men. Among them is an intelligent, sexually active 26-year-old with whom I recently spoke. I asked Bernie how he felt about sex, and his response was succinct and to the point. "It's a behavior, isn't it?" "Well, it's a behavior that is often motivated by feelings and sometimes brings up feelings," I responded. "For me, it's a behavior." "Have you ever been in love with someone?" "No." "Why are you asking that?" "Because the feeling of loving or being in love with someone sometimes motivates sex, and sex sometimes brings up the feeling of love." "Not for me," Bernie concluded. Bernie had clearly internalized the homosexual identity that obscures the sensibility behind sexual behavior. The obscuration has been so complete that a majority of heterosexuals, and apparently many gay men, do not approve of a peck on the cheek in public. Bernie's experience of gay sex is certainly not universal among gay men. The Indiana study authors suggest that the attachment to conventional male gender stereotypes may contribute to heterosexual disapproval of gay male displays of affection. This is no doubt true. but heterosexual men can openly express and receive affection with women, and thus the male gender stereotype that gay men violate is not a male stereotype, but a heterosexual male stereotype. In displaying affection for each other, gay men reveal mutually shared emotional intimacy between two men. Such intimacy is integral to the gay sensibility, but it violates the narrow behavioral definition of the homosexual, and a large majority of homosexuals do not want to see that definition challenged. The gay sensibility can feel emotionally threatening and socially disruptive to those who are trying to sustain heterosexual identities and heterosexually constructed lives. The enemy of those identities and lives must be contained, and that is accomplished with narrow, stigmatizing labels. If the idea of the homosexual is much too narrow and destructive, what is the inclusive and expansive alternative? It is the idea that men sometimes live with an internal sensibility that allows them to form significant emotional attachments to other men. A gay man is a man who is inclined to fall in love with other men. Free of imposed developmental distortions and stigma, gay men would do this quite effortlessly. If the idea of the homosexual is much too narrow and destructive, what is the inclusive and expansive alternative? It is the idea that men sometimes live with an internal sensibility that allows them to form significant emotional attachments to other men. A gay man is a man who is inclined to fall in love with other men. Free of imposed developmental distortions and stigma, gay men would do this quite effortlessly, very much as heterosexuals do. In psychology, the term used to describe such attachment of emotional energy is cathexis. Because of its history, it was first used in an English translation in place of Freud's original German word, Besitzung. The term cathexis is understood and used somewhat variably. For purposes of my discussion, cathexis is the natural human channeling and attachment of emotion to other people. When someone likes or loves, he is cathected. When he falls in love, he is deeply cathected. Being gay is nothing more or less than relatively consistent same-gender cathexis. Sexual interaction between men is not the finding issue in being gay, because sexual desires are directed by and follow from cathexis, while sex may in turn direct or deepen cathexis, or in bad sexual experiences weaken it. The particular form of sexual expression is not the defining issue. That many gay men are capable of sex without significant emotional cathexis has given rise to the idea that gay men are promiscuous. This observation, one of the key planks in the campaign to keep gay men homosexuals, tells us little about being gay. The issue has come to the fore because the campaign is focused on sex, and because gay men are typically more forthcoming about their sexual lives than heterosexual men, many of whom envy the sexual freedom gay men experience. Gay men have the same capacity for purely libidinous, uncathected sex that a majority of human males have, but gay men are unfettered by the traditional, socially promoted sensibilities and sexual expectations of women. Gay men are, in fact, often seeking cathexis in seemingly purely libidinal pursuits, for many are attempting to overcome a developmental experience that inhibits, often prohibits, the expression of cathexis. Those restrictions leave purely libidinal sex as the only path of connection to other men. As the Indiana study suggests, same-gender sexual behavior does not threaten heterosexuals so much as the possibility that the sex has meaning, that it reveals cathexis. Heterosexual society has a significant investment in keeping gay sex apparently promiscuous and emotionally empty. Gay men must learn to reject this influence and to experience themselves not as homosexuals, but as naturally homocathected, entitled to that cathexis, and entitled to its expression. When gay men deeply understand this distinction, they have a very different experience of themselves. There might also be another secondary benefit in the triumph of homocathexis over homosexuality. Judging by the Indiana study on love, the larger society might experience gay men differently if it did not define gay men entirely in sexual terms. In the words of the study authors, perceptions of love are related to willingness to grant social recognition to romantic couples of all types.